Hello, everybody. I'm Shaheen Sayadi. Um, I'm the founding and artistic director of One Light Theater and also One Light Theater and Media Arts. Um, and I work out of Halifax and Los Angeles. Um, and I started doing these conversations because I'm building my YouTube channel to talk and have conversations about topics that are important to me in arts, culture, politics, issues of the day. And I particularly would like to occupy some space on the internet uh, for myself and also create that space more and more for people of color. I seriously believe that there's a real lack of that online, and hopefully we can do that. We'll see. If you go to the YouTube channel, you can see a bunch of conversation, and every week we're having one or two, and I'm putting other ones just by myself on that YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about Canada's next film, basically looking at what is the face of Canadian film and television in coming years in our 21st century. And I have asked a friend of mine, and I'm just going to bring him and let him introduce himself, and then we'll get into it. Hello, Jorge.
Hi, Shaheen. How you doing?
How are you, sir?
Great, and you?
Good, thank you. Thanks for being here.
No problem. Anytime.
Jorge, I was going to do, the usual bio and introduction, but you go ahead, do it yourself. Take the space for yourself.
I am Jorge Requena Ramos. Soy Jorge Requena Ramos. Je suis Jorge Requena Ramos. I am a Mexican immigrant to Canada that lives in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I've been working in the film industry since I was 16 years old, so for longer than 20 years. I own a company called Prairie Boy Productions with my friend Orlando here in Winnipeg. We've produced hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of content, from documentary to commercials to short films to television. And I was a member of the DGC, the Directors Guild of Canada.
Jorge, you got muted for some reason and disconnected
There you
for
go.
a
I'm
second.
back. I'm
So
back.
just take it back a little bit.
Yeah, and I've also worked in the film industry in a diversity of capacities. Um, and I am the creative director of the Mariachi Ghost, which is a band from Winnipeg, Manitoba, that has played your festival and a bunch of other festivals across Canada and Europe
And
and
that's
the
the first time we
US.
met. The
That's the
first
first
time
time
I
we
met you
met.
was as a musician.
Yes, you called me after I said somebody was racist to me, and when we played a show, and you called me to support, which was very appreciated. Um, and um, I performed in your festival a couple times, including with a play that you helped me build.
Yes, and yes, but it wasn't just because somebody was being racist to you. Your music is great.
Thanks, man.
I think that's the most important thing. Um, so, Jorge, let's just back up a little bit, okay? And like other talks I've done with this series, it's not an interview. It's really a conversation and challenging each other's ideas and thoughts. Um, how do you see? I mean, when we're talking about film and television, it's impossible to not feel the weight of the American film and television industry.
Hmm.
Is everywhere, all over everything in the world. And here we are north of the border in Canada uh, with a much smaller industry, but Canada has an impact. And what is that impact? What do you think that impact is globally?
Um, Growing up in Mexico City, some weekends my dad used to take us to the Cinematheca in Mexico City, the Cineteca Nacional, and we would watch the National Film Board short films on the screen regularly. Things that were made in Canada by animators, a genius generation of animators. The Cat Came Back, and people that really made an impact internationally.
Mhm.
Um, Canada had a strong hold in Canada invented IMAX and this industry of the IMAX screen theater, where you could go and watch these beautiful, crazy, super high resolution films. That was a Canadian thing that happened across the
Mhm.
globe. And of course, there, Steven Soderbergh, Guy Madden, many filmmakers from Canada that are, highly respected across the globe. And you know, seems like a chunk of Hollywood actors are from Canada, and a chunk of Hollywood actors are from Britain.
Mhm.
Canada has a severe impact in specifically with acting in the global stage.
Mhm.
Um, After Schitt's Creek, I think we can all agree that people are paying attention to what Canada's doing, and how Canadian television is made. And I feel like one of the great successes of that show is that it's showcasing Canadian talent, and one of the great failures of that show is that they never mention Canada once in the
Mhm.
whole show, right? So the story doesn't happen in Canada; it happens in a small town that could be in Canada or it could be in Minnesota. It doesn't matter.
Mhm.
So the people are paying attention internationally to what Canadians are doing, um, and of course we have TIFF, which is an international level of recognition, tastemaker, globally qualifying film festival,
Mhm.
which I'm sure was very hard to build.
Jorge, I want to come back to what's being produced, and you mentioned the TV series. I want to come back to that, but before that, I want to also hear about your your own. What are you made of, and just getting. So when we're talking about Canadian, I think it's important to understand that yourself, myself, we come from a different background, and that has impact in what is now being Canadian culture.
Mhm.
Um, so I think it's important that we get into that too. For myself, I mean, I'm Iranian, and we know the impact of the Iranian storytellers, and especially with in film and television industry, Kiarostami and Farhadi have had huge impact on the modern storytellings, from the art films of Kiarostami to now works of people like Farhadi, that's being very popular these days. Um, and tell us for yourself. I mean, I'm here in Los Angeles, and you say a lot of Canadian actors are working in Hollywood. Uh, I see a much bigger number of people from Latin background, and especially Mexicans working here. Tell us a little bit about your own experience with film and television.
Yeah, I think the difference is the spaces we occupy. One of the most challenging parts about my career has been that people don't readily see me as the capacity to be a director, even
Mm-hmm.
though that's what I am. Um, Most people that see me in the big sets, understand that I'm there to be a technician or a crew member.
Mm-hmm.
It's not those opportunities aren't generated for people of color in the same way that they're generated for white people in Canada. Um, and that's not necessarily to the fault of white people in Canada. It might not be a conscious thing to do, but um, I have friends who have produced work, you know, um, of specific quality or whatever, and I've produced work of the same quality, and I can't get the same job. So, on a regular basis, it takes a special kind of person to understand that that is happening, and to open those doors for BIPOC filmmakers, especially outside of Toronto and Montreal.
Mm-hmm.
Diversity matters to institutions in Toronto and in Montreal, but outside of those places, it doesn't. We're invisible. So it's very complicated. I will say, the example that you give of the Mexican actors and the Canadian actors, there are way more Mexican actors in Los Angeles. None of
than
them
anybody
are.
than
None of
anybody
them
else.
are getting any protagonist roles. None of them are getting protagonic roles. I mean, maybe two or three of them. And I mean, like Pedro Pascal is getting, who's a Chilean actor, is getting great protagonic roles, and I'm very happy for him. And that he's the one I can think of. And even like great actresses that have worked in, like Salma Hayek, who carved a chunk of the industry for herself, has had very few protagonic roles, or just one in Frida that I can remember. Every other time she's some sort of a narco, or she's some sort of a hot girl that is in the background or something. The spaces we occupy are not the same. There is no Mexican Deadpool. There's no Mexican Ryan
Jorge,
Reynolds.
I just want to pause here for a second, and I don't want to change our conversation to go this way, but I think perhaps it is not a fair comparison to compare Canadians being successful in the mainstream in Los Angeles compared to Mexico, because the Mexican community or the Latino community, they have a huge industry in their own language.
Fair.
That and the best that Canada has had is Schitt's Creek. I think that's we need to mention that. I mean, you go to cable television and you see program after program after program, not just production but also broadcasting and all in Hispanic and Portuguese programs.
I feel like that's what's happening now, is that Mexican directors have won more Oscars than any other country outside of the US in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
For
I needed to pause for so
yeah.
we'll be fair to
I don't disagree with you. I feel like
we'll be fair to our Mexican friends here.
That is fair.
Yeah. And they have built that on their own. It's not something that they had to go and fight, like you mentioning Salma Hayek. They had to go and fight that for that piece from Hollywood. But the Latino community have built this on their own.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
It's sustainable and it's successful,
and it's independent.
And it's independent.
Yes, I agree with you on that. The interesting part of that is that isn't something that kind of affects the Canadian landscape of production.
Which you have to agree that Canada has not been able to create its own work.
No, Canada has been able to create its own work. It's just not as far-reaching as the work of, for example, Mexican filmmakers. And one of the main reasons of that,
when I say their work, I'm sorry. Let me clarify. When I say their work, I mean that work that identifies as Canadian. This work is Canadian, and it's for that. That has not happened except Quebec for Quebecois.
Yeah. And one of the main reasons of that is that Canada is very, very small populationally, and Mexico is very, very big compared. And also, Canadian membership, the sense of ownership of the product that is being put out in Canada is very low. With Schitt's Creek, for example, everyone in Canada right now loves Schitt's Creek after the awards. But before the awards, that wasn't the case. It was another shitty Canadian show. And in the case of Mexico, as soon as something is out and it's cool, people will watch it, will pay for a ticket to go watch it. And that took 20 or 30 years of really great filmmakers forcing people to watch these movies and making an effort. And there's a filmmaker from Mexico. His name is Arturo Ripstein, and he made probably 100 movies. And I think I've watched them all because they played in the TV. And some of them are excellent, weird, incredible. Nobody would see them because he was Mexican. It took a couple generations of Mexican filmmakers breaking out and winning awards and working hard to get to these Oscar contenders. Like, you can't be the first person out of Mexico with a film and be an Oscar contender. That's never going to happen. And also, I'd like to clarify, all of the Mexican directors that are successful are from wealthy families. So we're still in the caste system with the Mexican filmmakers. The Latin community has built a lot of stuff in the US. all from wealthy families. It needs to be said. It's very important that we recognize that classism and shadeism still exists in my community, and so it's a person that grew up in the center of Oaxaca in Mexico and was from an indigenous family is never going to get an Oscar in the current system. Those people that are winning Oscars won't let them, and I feel like it's the same predatorial system in the same way in Canada. It's just to exemplify. Does that make sense?
Yes, I don't agree. I think I don't agree on the issue that you're saying. Mexico is much bigger, or Latino world is much bigger than Canada. Because I mean, if in comparison, a small community of Quebec can build something like that, then the whole of Canada should be, especially with the subsidies that come from government. That those subsidies are not available in other. The two other places that we're comparing with.
Well, so they're available in Mexico.
Let's talk about that. I mean, well, not in Hollywood.
Not in the same
Hollywood.
Way.
I mean,
not in the same way. And I mean, a lot of the success that the Mexican filmmakers have is Hollywood success. They're working with Hollywood money now, right?
Yeah,
they're broken out of Mexico.
Yes, that's making work without any support. Mm-hmm. Completely on their own, without any government support or anything, here in Hollywood, and commercially being successful. That's
globally.
Now I want to bring that issue to Canada again. I want to talk about that, making that identity. That you have that subsidy, you have CBC, and we've seen the best of the diversity that might come out of CBC is something like a little mosque on the prairie.
Fair.
Well, that is laughable.
I will say,
all the subsidies. Yeah. So who's making the film and television right now, except the same old in
Canada? It's the same old. I will say this.
Let's talk about that.
CBC has 10 or 15 companies that they work with that make all of the CBC TV. Mm-hmm. Except for Schitt's Creek. I don't know if that was a company that was already kind of working or not. I have no idea on the production side of Schitt's Creek how that worked, but CBC has a roster of filmmakers they already work with. Mm-hmm. And they're all the same people always, for documentary, for TV series, for whatever. That's they will continue to make shows. Those people will continue to make shows. It's really hard to break into that scene. It's like I was saying from the wealthy filmmakers. It's predatory. It's complicated. You can be successful if you're in that clique, and then there's Telefilm, mm-hmm. who provides with funding for independent filmmaking of high quality. Telefilm has Oscars. They've funded work that has Emmys, and they have Golden Globes, and they have done great quality stuff. They also have done awful things with filmmakers, and it's a training ground for filmmakers, and so that's the expectation. Telefilm, I had a conversation with Telefilm a month and a half ago, where the point of my conversation was that Telefilm has made an effort not to represent me and not to represent people of color from the provinces outside of Ontario and BC. A great effort. They go through great lengths to get us to submit our work, get us to submit our films for awards, get us to submit our films for funding, so that they can tick the box that we have submitted from Manitoba and that we're a person of color. But the money never comes to those projects. Never. And
or if it comes, it's very small.
And if it comes, it's very small. And even a small amount of money would help. For them, a small amount of money is a big amount of money for us. And so there are people who are winning a TIFF and not getting Telefilm money in Manitoba, for example. And in Saskatchewan and Alberta, I know it's the same. Let alone the North, And so then there's the tax credits, which are very, very important. Every filmmaker should know the Tax Credit Act of their province back and forth. They need to know it back and forth. It's very important. They need to know exactly how it works. It doesn't matter where your job is. You need to know what it is, because that's where your job is coming from. 95% of the production that happens in Canada comes from the US. 95% of the production that happens in Canada is paid for by American money or is for an American network. All of the Hallmark movies, which are currently booming in Canada, there's probably 100 being made this year in Canada, all of those are happening with Hallmark money from the US with a American producer. I think in Manitoba, we're set to make 16 even during COVID this year. And
16
films, feature films.
feature films.
And that is allowing a lot of people to work in positions that they weren't able to work in before. So, for example, in Winnipeg, we only had one director of photography who moved to Toronto, constantly. And now we have 2 or 3 directors of photography that are fully trained, have done 10 films, they have great experience. There isn't one that is a person of color yet. And then in the directing ground, there is room for directors to work on those movies, which doesn't exist in other industries. And the majority of there isn't one of those directors that directs Hallmark movies that is a person of color yet. In Manitoba, for example, or Saskatchewan, and I don't know in BC, I'm suspecting maybe. And so there is growth that is happening. All the seeds that we do know how we were talking about, there needs to all to be a scene that grows for those Academy Award winning filmmakers to exist. That's at the stage that we're in right now. We're growing our scenes and getting our skills so that we can develop those filmmakers. But unfortunately, we're going like this. We're rising our filmmakers, but the bottom, there's nothing happening right now. We lost the most important fund in Canada, which was it was called the Much Fact fund, and it was a short film fund that was national that had low stakes. They would give you like $25,000 for a film, which is a lot for a short film if you're like starting up. And they would give you give you some production training and stuff like that. And it didn't require a big application to get it, which is important. That fund made the careers of a lot of filmmakers. A lot of filmmakers that you see from Canada that are coming out were able to break out because of those short films. They submitted to TIFF, they won, they went to South by Southwest, that's how you get kind of noticed. And so that fund is lost, and we don't have a replacement for it. And there's a provincial replacement for it in BC, and there's a provincial replacement for it in Ontario, but none of the other provinces have that system. And we
go
ahead.
So then I have to ask, why everybody's supporting this system? I mean, here we're sitting,
yeah,
and we know that the history of CBC, we basically saying that it's wash your hands off it.
Yeah.
And here we see the up and down and up and down and up and down of telefilm.
Yeah.
And the little money that comes through, programs like Canada Council for some experimental stuff. Again, very, very, very historically unequally distributed. The majority of it, again, going to Quebec, like everything else. And at the same time, we're saying the only place that people are working is because of the work that Americans are bringing here. I mean, Netflix just built a studio in Toronto. And then why? Then why is it that everybody, no, I shouldn't say everybody, why there is such a culture of let's support and continue supporting the public support for these organizations, and taxpayers' money keep going to these places? Why we continue supporting it? Why is it? Why we cannot find a way to stand up and say, maybe it is time that we don't ask for more money for this kind of activities, for this kind of distribution of the arts funding, and we just ask, where is this money going? I mean, why, if CBC is for everybody and is not representing everybody in Canada, why should it get the public support? And of course, when you say this kind of things, you get the angry mob storming on you and being really violent. No, we need to support CBC. But then when they get their funding, everybody just goes and hides behind something like Schitt's Creek and Then why? So I'm not asking, I'm not saying you're supporting it, but what we all have supported this system. So I'm saying I'm asking, the majority of the workers of this industry in places like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, England, these colonial systems of Commonwealth, with their public support for arts, which we don't have in the state. It's very different, and it's booming, and we see the result. Why the support? Why do we have to continue supporting CBC?
I will hit back with I think having a public broadcaster is very important, and I think having a public broadcaster that does good work is very important. For a well developed society, let alone for artists to be able
public
to
public
show work.
public public broadcaster that is bigger than other commercial
Yeah,
broadcasters in
yeah.
Canada.
I think
So
that's important.
that
I
I mean,
think it needs
that's
to do better. But I think
I
it's
mean, US
important.
also has public broadcasters too.
Yeah, but I mean, but they don't mean the same. When we're discussing about the Canadian identity,
Mhm,
it's super important to think about how much CBC has done to cement that Canadian identity for better and worse,
mhm.
and how much.
It's well, from what I heard from you, it seems to be only for better for some.
Yes, when it comes to the bigger projects, right? Like when it comes to like a feature film, um, or that they can show,
Mhm.
or a TV series, it's definitely the same old. But when it comes to the groundwork work, like CBC Arts and their short pieces, or the local CBCs and their the work that they commission to artists, I feel like that is, it has a certain impact in what the Canadian identity is, and they have been making an effort to diversify those channels, as best they can. It is the
Can you
big
tell
money
me what they
suckers that
have to
haven't
show for
changed.
it?
Some of them, I mean, they do have awards. They do have, people have been able to, like, the
And
majority of what the Canadian industry is standing, and what is stopping the gear grinding of creativity and the scene development and the sustainability. What people are blind to see is that when the system isn't producing original work, indigenously produced original work, and by indigenous I mean from people of Canada, not necessarily just indigenous, but also indigenous to Canada, work that was originally originated by a Canadian brain. Um, if that isn't happening, the industry isn't sustainable. That's what people are blind to see. When the tap of Hallmark movies shuts, because it will, when the tap shuts, and they decide that they don't want to come to Canada to make movies anymore,
I don't
which
think
can
I
happen
said
like that.
shut down the tab.
No, but they can, right? When the tap shuts down,
Mm.
they all those people are going to be out of work with nothing to do, and none of it is gonna no nobody's gonna have a say, I have an idea. We have all these cameras
Okay,
and we have all of
let
these
me make
trained
some
people.
clarification, Jorge, because I think
Yeah.
I'm not saying that we should be, shutting down the tab to experimental work, and especially putting public support, taxpayers'
Hmm.
money behind the works of those who have not seen themselves on stages and in
Hmm.
films. I didn't
Hmm.
say that. I'm not saying
Hmm.
that. I'm actually very much in support of that. Everything I've done with my work, my career, is been to support that.
Yeah.
I'm saying, if we're not seeing clear results after all these times, why continue supporting the same system?
Yeah. No, I
Why?
agree.
Why? Okay.
There needs to be people like you
I
and
mean,
I working at
this
CBC.
narrative of that we need to have a strong public broadcaster, it seems to be the blindfold.
In a way, yeah, I think there needs to be more people of color working for people of color inside of CBC. And there needs to be less of a mandate to tick boxes and more of a mandate to have long lasting impact. So, like, what I'm saying is that the
Mhm.
board of CBC needs to be composed of at least 50% people of color and BIPOC people, and like a heavy indigenous presence needs to be there, and they need the strategic planning that they carry forward needs to have accountability at the end of it, whereby there needs to be brown people with awards that got paid for by CBC, not just awards. And there needs to be a 50% BIPOC people having worked on shit on jobs that matter. There need to have leadership positions for this to change. That hasn't happened, and nobody's talking about it. Nobody's saying that needs to happen. And every time somebody like me goes and says it, people get mad. You've had the same reaction,
Yeah.
except for the people that want that are like that comment in the background and say, "Thanks for saying that. I agree with you," but they're not raising their
Yeah.
voices. So
Yeah.
it's a complicated thing. I had a conversation with Lucius at CBC Arts. They canceled one of my pieces. I was pretty mad. I sent them an angry email, and then I gave my phone call and I was like, "You can't cancel my piece. You don't have any pieces of people of color from people coming from people of color from Manitoba. Zero. I checked. So if you cancel my piece, you're cutting the one brown guy that you have in Manitoba. That's crazy." And he was just coming into the position. He's a black filmmaker himself, and he was like, "Man, I understand what you're saying, and this is my third day on the job, and I'm just kind of sending emails and organizing the files, but I totally get what you're saying. But people need to call them on it. People need to make a phone call, and you may find somebody that is willing to listen inside of these organizations. I haven't found those people in I have found very few of those people locally, and very few of those people working at Telefilm and working at. I mean, I found people willing to listen at the Canada's Council that are willing to invest in my work, as and but there's also people that are not, and people that are don't want to take the chances of with 20 years of experience, I'm still being told that I have to pay my dues. And people that have 10 years of experience and have done less work than me, that happen to be white, are constantly working. So I know that's
Well,
not what's happening.
that's the usual story. Yes, absolutely. I always have to work 10 times harder to just be in the game. Never mind, actually, doing, well,
That's yeah.
that's the given. But let's move on from this. But I just want to say this, and then we can move on from this
Let
and
me add
talk
something
about.
before we
So,
finish talking about
yes, go on.
subsidies.
Yeah.
There needs to be a system whereby the tax credit systems of all the provinces, and Nova Scotia deleted theirs, which was a stupid mistake. Whoever did that, you're an idiot. And same with the ones in Saskatchewan. Whoever decided to quit the tax credits is an
Yeah,
idiot.
the one in Nova Scotia was just dumb, but
They
just
killed
plain
they
dumb.
killed the
Absolutely.
industry, and
Yeah.
nobody's coming without tax credit. But especially because 95% of the money is American, they're coming for the tax credit.
Yeah.
There's no illusions there. Everybody knows that. The tax credit system is the only way we have to enforce good behavior in our industries. And so the tax credit system needs to build in policies that ensure BIPOC people, with specific focus on Indigenous people, are working on leading positions. And if you don't do that, you don't get the tax credit. That's what needs to happen. Sounds hard, sounds dumb. A lot of people are going to hate it. I'm going to get a lot of angry emails. Don't care. It's
Whatever.
true. It needs to be a thing. There needs to be a restriction to tax credits if you are not employing BIPOC people in key decision-making positions in every production. It's important that we do
I
that.
have to say, getting angry emails and comments is the story of our lives. Jorge. Let's not worry about that. But let's say that maybe we can agree on this. That yes, that's great, but I don't think that's enough.
Fair.
I think that the fact remains that people of color are being represented much better in a system that is not devised like the Canadian system, the colonial system, and I think Southern California is a great example of it. That there's no other place that diversity is seen and felt in the art scene of many different people, and they're all being successful and they're doing their work, and there's no such system of that we have in Canada. And again, I'm not saying this that we need to cut. No, I'm actually saying we need to cut the support for those who have already been established themselves and their culture and their voices, and completely cut it off, and put the support. That's why I always say, this continuing a unified voice for more arts funding in Canada is blinding. We have to stop and ask where the money that is available right now, where that money is going, and then see if we need actually more money. Because we continue asking for more money, we continue the same gap moving forward. Let's talk about who's doing the film, and the face of Canada is changing. I always say, my generation, we've been very apologetic about our space. My daughter's not going to be. She's just getting into university now, and they're not. Your kid's not going to be dealing with this system the way me and you have been. They're not going to. There will not be any apologies about the young people working and getting into the Canadian film and television market, in art scene, in cultural scene in general. Um, they're dealing with the inequalities very differently. Um, they're not sitting down like me and you and talking and talking and talking about it and sitting. They're just doing it. They're making a legal issue out of the inequalities. uh, who are they? What is the wave look like, Jorge? Let's talk about that, because I think that's more important. We know about CBC, we know about telefilm, we know about Canada Council and all those things. Who's making the waves? What is the wave going to look like?
One of the things that I figured out working on unionized sets and other sort of industry commercials and that kind of stuff, and is that the only way to get to the top is by starting at the top in your mind. It's kind of weird to say, but
Mm-hmm.
you can't be a director unless you're just directing. The second you, especially as a brown person, the second you step away from that role and you become an assistant director or you become a technician of some sort, um, in the majority of cases, that pathway will lead to sticking to that job and paying your mortgage with it, and then you can't really take risks. So make movies. Basically, the hack is start making movies, make them shitty, make them cheap, make 100 of them,
But
and they
Jorge,
will
let's
get
move
better.
from how to do it and the
Yeah.
support. But who's doing it, and what does it look like?
So
What's the scene?
this is my segue to say
Okay.
that the people who are making progress in our scene are people who are self-starters that are
Mhm.
starting already with a DSLR camera and no money and a couple of actors and making great original thinking films, and they're telling stories that are cultural stories. This is a super important thing. um, Cultural stories from Canada, outside of Canada, which is pretty much 99% of the world, are super successful because people see, especially indigenous stories, these stories are as very original, rare, peculiar, and there are stories that can transcend genre that you can tell with by sticking to cultural storytelling in a modern way. I was recently producing this horror film with filmmaker Jordan Molero, and it's a horror movie about an indigenous, like sort of demon creature, the Wendigo. That it's a traditional story that the elders tell, but it's told in a new way with modern characters, and it speaks about mental illnesses and addictions and depression and anxiety and things that modern indigenous people feel, urban indigenous people feel, and so it touches on both of those things. And I feel like the majority of the good content that is coming out of these communities has that same uh, tangible through line, is that they're using cultural um, relevance to create work that exposes their their culture in a new way and touches on actuality and contemporary ideas and ideals, and what it is to grow up as a Chinese Canadian, what it is to
Mhm.
grow up as a Mexican Canadian, what it is to grow up as an Iranian Canadian, and what it is to celebrate your identity. People are interested in that, and so that work I feel like has been the most groundbreaking in any genre. You can make a horror story with an old Iranian tale or with an old Mexican tale, and that will be a way better horror story than if you try to tell some sort of a boogie, scary ghost thing with this possessed and like, oh, why another, another Catholic ghost that is like, in the Catholic Church, and like, everything is being done, but these are original
Mhm.
ideas, and so I feel like the people that I see climbing through the scenes are like that. And then there's a filmmaker in Vancouver. His name is Alfonso Chin. His Mexican, Chinese, Canadian. His dad's Mexican, his mom's Chinese. He's a director of photography. He's got an incredible, very well developed look to his work, and that is partially because he grew up in a multicultural home where the aesthetics of his upbringing were complicated and
Mhm.
interesting, and pulling in all sorts of directions. And so he's encompassing ideas of what beauty is and what art is are enormous. And I feel like that is the advantage that people that grow biculturally or triculturally in Canada, which are a lot, have an advantage in that they can create work from both perspectives with one through line. Um, and I see that happening more and more and more with Canadian work in festivals, and it, it is becoming more and more and more interesting as the years go by. I'm particularly paying attention to that. I will say I have a bias to, an appreciation for cultural relevance stories and culture forward work. But when we were working on our little short film festival, that is the work that I wanted to find and showcase. That is because I've seen those filmmakers work and work hard and make things out of nowhere, and then all of a sudden I see them directing an episode of a TV show,
Mhm.
that I like, out of coming from that perspective, and a lot of them have to move to Los Angeles, I will be honest,
Mhm.
to be able to continue doing that work. But that work is informed by the Canadian context still.
Mhm. My feeling is that the digital age, and you can just grab pretty much any phone right now and do a lot of crazy stuff with it, and the kids are being very creative, but especially kids in rural areas, indigenous youth on the reserves, especially removed from the away from the big city, and what's happening, and that scene that we were talking about. um, my feeling is that they're doing a lot of work online on their own, without paying attention to that system that everybody who comes into the art scene in Canada has to be part of that scene. That it seems to me that that's where the real change is happening. That's where the
Yeah.
real work is happening.
Yeah, and the indigenous community figured out a long time ago that they were not going to get very far with the system that was working out, like, not for them. And
Mhm.
so the indigenous community started the Imagination Festival, which
Yep.
happens in Toronto, and
Imaginative.
Imaginative, sorry, and out of that festival, a lot of really great work has been showcased. Particularly here in Manitoba, filmmakers realized that the system wasn't welcoming to them, and that gatekeepers were there to keep them out of the
But I'm
TV
going
industry.
beyond that. Again,
Yeah,
imaginative is also, again, it's they do great work, and it's highly needed. And I hope
yeah,
that a lot of those taxpayer support
yeah,
from places we were talking about goes
yeah,
to somebody like imaginative.
yeah,
But I'm talking about like uh, um, the online um, sites.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, that's what I'm
The
saying, is that
Instagram and TikTok and
it's
YouTube, and
finally
I think that's
paying
where the
off.
big change is happening.
Yeah, it's finally paying off, and that TikTok and Instagrammers have a great built, quickly acquired sophistication, visual sophistication.
Mhm.
They like when I shot my first film, it was like a camera with a person talking and then another person talking, and there were, the sophistication of placement and blocking and stuff that happens in very short interesting videos on TikTok and Instagram for those Instagrammers, young Instagrammers. It's like they put 100, they watch 100 movies and they learn all of that language and they can put it in that
Mhm.
15-second clip. And I mean, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying is that it's finally paying off for the indigenous community to have all of that, this infrastructure and the work of all of these people for the last 20 years to get to a level where like the people in the communities are now able to produce work like that and be groundbreaking like that, and get, and that work actually is noted, and they get jobs out of it. It's not
Mhm.
like, it's not just they did something cool. It's
No.
like they there's people like that Jordan
Yeah.
Molara that I was telling you about who will
Yeah.
watch that and say,
YouTube
grab
pays
them,
pretty good.
you know and
Right.
even if you don't have a lot of views, there'll be somebody that says, oh my god, this is good,
Yeah.
hire this guy to do this next
Yes.
thing, and
Yeah.
so it that is, you're right, that is the revolution of democratization of film language and visual storytelling. That also comes with a caveat that there is too much work being produced, and 99% of it is of no quality,
Mhm.
and so it's very complicated to say everybody and their dog is a filmmaker. Is a phrase that people were saying 10 years ago. It's twice as hard now,
Mhm.
and so there's a lot of competition of people that have a lot of that have an enormous catalog of TikToks,
Mhm.
and I've never worked in the film industry,
Okay.
but
So what? I don't understand. Like, why should we pay attention to that kind of comment
and
anyway?
yeah, that's
I mean, who cares?
it's there's a
Mhm.
lot of people, right? And so
Yeah.
um that's it. It's just meant to say
There were little bad works was being built before, and now it's a lot of bad work. So
yeah, exactly. It just, you're swimming in them, and so to find the good stuff, it takes work, right? And people do it. People do that work. There's people who are there
Mhm.
all day, and oh, this is funny, and that's how we get like Daniel Apodaca with his like beautiful skateboarding video,
Mhm.
drinking juice, becoming celebrities. It's a simple thing, but it's really visual storytelling.
Mhm.
Like it's if he he might not be think of himself as a sophisticated storyteller, but it's a gorgeous, seamless, um, you know, uh, smooth moving shot of somebody in an unlikely setting having the best day of his life. And he was a great performer, and like that, there's a lot of little of people creating little bits of work,
Mhm.
and learning how to tell longer and longer and longer stories right now, that in the next 15 years we're going to have a scene of indigenous filmmakers from Canada that is world recognized, like we have from Mexico.
And I think also others, people from other minority groups. But what I think what might be one of the keys here is that um, young people are very uh, capable of dealing with the new technology.
Mm-hmm.
They were born into it, and it's first language for them.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we see that kind of growth in that area.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah,
it's interesting that now we've come to this place, and we're saying this is where the democratization of the work is happening.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I think everybody like
What are we saying then? Then are we
it's.
saying that the system that places like Canada have failed us for diversity? Are we giving up on it, and we're
I
just continuing with this with this new age and new generation and the new technology, and just giving up on that, or what?
I mean, I'm not saying that.
I mean, I don't see any, I see absolutely no real diversity coming out of places like CBC.
I'm more
That's
worried
the one
about.
that you're saying that maybe CBC is I see nothing coming
Yeah.
out of places like
I
CBC.
mean, I will say Kim's Convenience, for example, Korean theater director who wrote a quirky,
Yeah,
interesting
I
play
know.
and
Yes,
became,
I know the work very well. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Um, I feel like that's an example of how CBC could be doing better. Again, that is Toronto and Toronto
That
centric.
was not the work of CBC. That was a play done
That
by
you're touching on it. That you're
that was a
touching on it.
play done by somebody on his own, supported by few theater artists from his own community,
Yeah,
done with very little support, and then got picked up by a big theater company.
yeah.
Again, I don't think that the credit for Kim's Convenience should go to CBC.
That's exactly it. It's what you're saying is the right thing is there needs to be a willingness
I will give
to
CBC the little mosque on the prairie, though.
uh no, I think that's
They
actually
can
a
have
producer from
that.
Saskatchewan. um I think there needs to be a willingness
Mhm.
for large organizations to stop trying to do right by BIPOC artists and listen to what BIPOC artists have to say and how they want to receive the help.
Or not be at their mercy and just cut their funding off.
Should sure. And if they don't,
I
then
mean,
cut their funding up. I
I mean,
I
how long we
like
gotta sit and just
yeah.
hope that
I
they will
grew up in a
change their
system.
behavior?
I grew up in a system that didn't have any funding supports when I was growing up, and then Mexico got funding supports in the last 20 years. Mexico's funding supports
Yeah,
became very similar to the Canadian ones with less money, but very similar.
yeah, very.
And when I was growing up, they were literally only the rich were filmmakers. Those are the Oscar winners. And now there are filmmakers from many different backgrounds from the neighborhoods of Mexico City that would have otherwise just raw talent made a movie, got played on a festival, and then they got a job, and then like et cetera, et cetera. Just like the indigenous community here. And because the system of support became important to the system, they were able to produce works that went on to be important internationally, right? And now there's a scene of filmmakers in Mexico which didn't exist when I lived in Mexico, or not in the same way, as much as they will tell me that they did. There's 1,000 filmmakers for every 10 filmmakers that used to be in Mexico working, and they're making work for original TV series that are incredible for CBC
Yeah.
and sorry, not for CBC, for Netflix and Amazon and stuff, right?
But
Like,
again,
um,
Jorge, that's highly is because of the work of, we're talking about Mexicans, and let's talk about that community that the
yeah,
Mexicans are doing in South California, and then they have to go for the support back to Mexico to get the actors and and the work. I think
not
that's a big
necessarily.
part of. Yeah,
There's
but
an
big part of, I mean,
anti-Hollywood
the work is
movement in
being
Mexico.
built here for the cable television, for Netflix, for all of those,
Sure,
and
I
also
remember also
the
that.
digital world. When we're talking about the past 20 years, you
Yeah,
cannot cut out and not include the work of that coming out of the digital world, and the ability of people to make a movie with a little dinky telephone.
yeah, sure. I mean, I will also say there's an anti-Hollywood movement. I'm sure there was one in Iran. The anti-outside culture movement in Mexico, and a lot of those filmmakers came out of that movement.
Mhm.
It's a movement that I love, even though I can't be a part of because I don't live in Mexico, and I'm obviously living in Canada, and in the snow. But it's a pro Mexican identity movement of artists that are proud of being Mexican. This is the difference, I think, between
Yeah, the
this
best
is something.
example of it is Roma. I mean, Roma. I mean,
Exactly.
one of my my most favorite movies ever.
And yet again, that kid's the child of a doctor, and he's always been, he's always had this, been a person of privilege within Mexico. He's a whiter Mexican. So there's a long discussion about how privilege works in Mexico that it needs to be included into this conversation, and it that exports as well. Like Mexicans in the States still operate under the Mexican caste system when they live in the States, even though they aren't in Mexico
Yeah.
anymore. And in Canada here, I've encountered that with people, being myself from the neighborhoods of Mexico City, and encounter people from the fancy, closed gated communities of Mexico. They don't want to be friends with me, even though we're both Mexicans in Canada, and that's what happens. But what I will say is that um, that original work that is created, and that identity, that pride for the Mexican identity and what makes them Mexican, it's really complicated what being a Mexican is. And it's
Mhm.
also really easy to know what being a Mexican is because it's been there for 500 years.
Mhm.
It's been built for a really long time. And for better or worse, we know who we are. Canada hasn't done that yet, and I think like Canada has been hesitant to do so. I don't think
Mhm.
Canada even though the National Film Board's mission is to explain Canada to Canadians in a quest for the Canadian identity. I don't think that people in Canada have wanted to actually recognize what the Canadian identity is. And I don't think that in any short measure that is because the Canadian identity is complicated and painful to accept, and it needs to accept every single immigrant, and it needs to accept every single First Nation person that lives in Canada. And so in order to do that, we will all need to accept that there's some heartache to be had in the Canadian identity. And I feel like until we do that as a people and through our art, it's going to be very complicated for us to develop a scene that is proud, that can get to those places as an art scene. Am I making any sense? I feel like
Absolutely. I don't, I don't, I have my own explanation about the Canadian cultural identity. I agree with you in most parts. Yes, I think uh, the majority of the people working in the you know those who have in the art scene, those who have, um, uh, they may not be saying it, but they believe that there is a Canadian culture identity. They believe that, and I say this because we see the majority of the big works that are highly supported financially, they come out. At the end of the day, those kind of works becomes the flagship, that this is the Canadian cultural identity, which is not. Which is not. We're far away from having a Canadian cultural identity. But those who have, they continue to believe, again, if even they don't want to say it, they believe that there is a Canadian cultural identity. And Quebec certainly has its own identity,
yeah.
which Quebec doesn't care. And CBC and Canada Council for the Arts and the Canadian Heritage and every big organization, cultural organization, keeps supporting that separation, because we live in a colonial system that racism is systemic, and because people have different classes of status. Yeah, we have Quebec that has a special space in Canada, and they're different group of citizens. We have accepted that. We have legalized that in Canada, which is a crime, if you ask me. But unfortunately, that's where we are with the Canadian situation. Um, I don't see much hope in the subsidized system, unless its subsidies is only for those who have historically not been supported.
I I
Yeah.
partially agree. I also think that there needs to be a certain amount of, as jaded as I am with the industry, and as much as the National Film Board, the Telefilm, and CBC, and every other broadcaster have failed me as a person of color. Failed me. I will say it again. I'll say it one more time. Failed me as a person of color. I will. I still think that the onus is on us, of us BIPOC artists, to generate work of weight and of importance,
Absolutely. No,
and the
I
onus is
don't
on
have
us,
any.
us
Yes,
BIPOC artists,
yes.
to support each other, and to take the government to task. I feel what I'm saying is, have I been disillusioned with the film
Mhm.
industry and my film career? Enormously.
Yeah.
That have they crushed me? Fuck no. And so what I think we need to do is I think we need to create a new fund that needs to the money needs to come out of all of those funds, and it needs to be called the BIPOC Film Fund Strategy or whatever. And everybody that works there is a person of color or an indigenous person, and every person in the council and the juries is a person of color. 100% of them need to do that. And
Yeah,
then
I disagree with you. I think the money that is there should be just renamed BIPOC money, and that's it.
sure,
Because we know
we're saying the same thing.
Well, no, we're not saying the same thing. I think that is exactly what the colonial system works on, creating different pockets and different ghettos to say, okay, we give you your money here, so go there and play and be nice. I don't want to get into the funding conversation. I think we're opening maybe we set aside another time we come and argue about that one. But let's wrap it up, Jorge. About so can we agree that the big cultural organizations are not the producers of the diversity and the democratization of the arts in Canada, and people, especially the young. I mean, every time we talk about these things, we have to put the young people in the front when we're talking about identity. They're doing it on their own, and they're using whatever resources, with little resources that they have, and they're doing it, and they're making their headways, and they're moving forward.
And that will have more impact than them ever working on any unionized institute. I mean, not that they shouldn't and go learn and practice and get a job and work as much as they can, because it gives you skills. But the work that they do independently with no money will be more meaningful, more impactful, more worthy of their time than any of the other work that they can do anywhere else. That's been repeatedly proven to me through my career with everybody that just went independently, did their own thing, and shot their own feature with $3. That became more important than all the other 120 shows they had worked on. So it's important that we follow that independent spirit and that creative spirit, even though it's hard and costly, and you might have to remortgage your house or whatever. But that is more impactful as an artist than any of the other work. And I agree with you that young people are carrying they're going to have to eventually also carry the torch of the work that we're doing is going to pass on to them. But it's very important to remember, Shaheen, and I wanted to say this before our conversation is over, is that the industries are there to be industries. They're not there to make art. They're not even there to distribute it. They're there to make money. And the second that we jump into the industries without thinking about it, we become their product. Like if the film industry was a supermarket, what is the filmmakers? And the filmmakers, the lettuce. The producers are putting the lettuce on the shelf, and then somebody's coming and buying it. But the filmmakers are the lettuce, and if we can't let ourselves become a product, as much as we have to put out a product to people to buy it, and especially successful products do very well, and you can continue working. As an artist, you have to remember that it's about your work. That there's no industry without filmmakers.
Yes.
Right. And
without the artists. Yeah.
Exactly. And that is especially true for diverse artists. Our work is very necessary. We need to counter what the idea of Canadian culture is. We need to inform it with our work. We need to salt and pepper it and put a little bit of spice, as Mexican and Iranian, we can't eat without spice. The Canadian culture needs to become
eat without the spice.
Canadian culture needs to become more spicy. That's what I'm saying.
Yes. And perhaps my spice is my spice, and I put as much as spice. Sometimes I don't want a spice, and that should be respected. My place, and that's the thing. I think we can all agree that self-respect is the first thing, and keeping it real. Jorge, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I love you, brother.
Chatting with you, man.
Keep at
love
it.
You too.
Keep at it. Okay.
We're swimming. We're drowning.
we're not drowning. We're gonna make it. We are doing it. And that's why we're doing this. We're gonna say goodbye together, but I just want to say this. That's why we're doing this. That's why I'm doing this. Please, if you can, we're trying to have. I have. We have a few more of them coming up. A series of talks about the fishery situation and 1752 treaty and what's happening in the Maritimes. We're doing talks, as you saw in this one, that you don't usually hear. These are talks that are filtered and directed in a certain way. And that's what I'm doing here, having conversations that are not filtered, that people come out and say what they want to say and is not, not going through the filter of the usual media and gatherings. And that's what we're doing here. Please, if you can, go on my YouTube channel and subscribe. And if you care about this issue, talk about it. And that's all we can ask. Talk about it. And like Jorge said, go and do your work, do your stories, do it. Any way you can, do it. I come from a theater background, and I'm trying to understand and do film work here in Los Angeles now that I live here. And you just have to do it. You just make your own stories and your own work, and you just do it. Thank you very much for being with us. Thanks again,
everybody.
Jorge. Bye, everybody.